Greetings, everyone. Welcome again to our Sinoicus Herodotus common session. And this is our penultimate common session. I hope that some of you are planning and looking forward to meeting with us on Thursday. On just another 30-minute session, but we can speak a little more broadly and about Herodotus in general, and hopefully get some ideas that you have about the course and how it went as well. But tonight we can talk largely about Book 9, but also if you had any summative thoughts that you'd like to share tonight as well, that is open for discussion. And I think, and we have a few participants set to go, I believe. I think we'll start with Belmont Abbey, and there is time tonight if anyone wants to jump in or write something in the chat room. I'll try to read it for you. So let's go to Belmont Abbey to start, because I know some of them are ready to share some of their thoughts.
Hi, I'm from Diakey's group, and we had a couple of classes, one of which was on women. What role do women play in Herodotus' books that we've read so far? And I took as a jumping off point the fact that just having finished Book 9 earlier today, that the history begins and ends with a vengeful wife getting somebody killed. But women in the book fulfill all kinds of roles. They fill, completely aside from the vengeful wife, a lot of their roles have to do with their influence on powerful men. They're queens, they're oracles, or they're just people that the men have to protect, all the nameless thousands that the Athenians were trying to evacuate. Only in one case that I could think of did a woman fill a role traditionally held by men, occupying her own kind of position of power instead of, for example, in the case of the oracle, being a conduit for Apollo, or in the case of the queen, or an advisor warning men away from doing stupid things. And that was Artemisia, who did in fact warn Mardonius away from doing a stupid thing, and he ignored her. But that seemed to be kind of a pattern book of women telling men not to do something, and as often as not being ignored. And this goes for oracles as well as commanders and queens. So men ignore women at their peril, according to Herodotus. Whether it's walking into a crowded market full of women with suspiciously long brooches, or sleeping around in plain view and giving nice dresses to their concubines. That's what we had about them.
All right. I'm from Cambyses. We only had 2 posts today. They were on 2 different prompts, and the prompts this week for us were more broad about kind of our takes on the histories as a whole. Starting off with, we wanted to talk about kind of the smaller characters, the side characters who weren't, the big rulers or anything like that, but talk about the roles that they played. And Maggie responded on that, and she was arguing that those smaller characters can actually have a profound effect on the histories in a couple different ways. Firstly, by actually affecting the major events in a big way. She used the example of Cleomenes' daughter, who only shows up for a very brief moment twice in the book. However, she convinces Cleomenes to drastically change his action in terms of like moving his army, the Spartan army, which obviously makes a huge difference. And then Maggie also talked about the role that smaller characters can play in terms of revealing things about the other larger characters. She talks about Pythias in book 7, how Xerxes' reaction to Pythias shows a lot about his character, and it affects how Xerxes goes about his actions in book 7. So basically she concluded that the smaller characters, even though they don't show up in as huge roles as some of the big rulers, they still do have a large effect on the histories as a whole. And then I talked about whether or not I would refer other classmates or whoever to the Herodotus histories, and I talked about the value that the histories have. And I talked about that twofold. In the ethnography, the value it has as an ethnographic source, talking about starting back in book 2, how Herodotus addresses Egypt and goes in depth on the culture of Egypt and customs of Egypt. And I just thought that Herodotus being one of the first people to go into the ethnography and history of these ancient cultures, he addressed things that we don't have a lot of detailed documentation about now. So he gives us a lot of information about those peoples that we wouldn't otherwise have. So as an ethnographic source, anyone who wants to study people from the ancient Greek world, he's one of your first and best sources on that. In addition to the Egyptians, he goes on in book 3 to talk about all the smaller places around Persia, even into Africa, talking about Libya and Ethiopia, and even as far north as some of the Balkan areas in Europe. And it's lots of places and nations that we don't even hear about at all now, not names that we would know, but Herodotus brings attention to the importance of those people and their cultures. And in that way, he gives a lot of information that we wouldn't have any access to through other sources. And then also just the historical events that he talks about. He has value in that he gives a lot of detailed account of the battles and the events of the Persian War, one of the best sources we have on that. And obviously the Persian War then has a great effect on the development of Greek history, which then in turn affects Roman history, and Roman history shapes Europe as we know it. So both as ethnographical and purely historical, Herodotus has a lot of value. So I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's looking into the ancient Greek history or anyone around the Greek world.
Excellent, thank you. And that was Eric and Casey, right?
Yes.
Yes, I just want to make sure we had your names for your fame. You have to have your names documented to have the glory and honor. All right. So thank you, Eric and Casey. And yeah, good thoughts. Lots. I liked how both of you pulled together some specifics from book 9 and then also looked at the big picture. We can keep talking about that too on Thursday. See how you can respond to both of those summaries about Herodotus. Let's see, I always can count on someone from Southwestern to share their voice. So let's turn to Texas for a bit. All right.
All right, from Texas, who's on? I guess I can go for Croesus. This is Aaron, and in Croesus, it was kind of all about big reflections on the whole history. So the first response was from Kayla, who was actually pretty critical of Herodotus. She discounts him as a historian because she regards him as a biased source. And oftentimes the accounts that he gives are based upon essentially gossip, she says, and so that they can't be really treated as reliable historical fact. Kind of tying into a theme that's been recurring throughout our discussions here. And then the second response was from Reese, and he actually goes back to book 1, where Herodotus kind of tells us what his overarching mission is in writing these histories, and he identifies 3 distinct goals that Herodotus sets out for himself. The first being to record, and preserve the histories of nations as essentially evaluating these different people groups on their own terms. And Reese thinks that Herodotus did that very successfully as he progressed through the Lydians and the Egyptians and the Scythians and all these other people groups in between, and the Persians and the Greeks, of course. And he did each one of them justice and tried to demonstrate some level of fidelity to their own narratives and not kind of project his own views onto them. Then the second goal was trying to tell the stories and preserve the great deeds of men, and obviously that's a pretty prominent way that Herodotus structures each one of the narratives, is by talking about specific great men. Croesus in book 1, Darius, Xerxes, Themistocles, all these people that Reese says were presented well. And then the final goal, of course, was trying to discern the causes of the Persian wars themselves. And on this count again, Reese thinks that Herodotus succeeded. And so it was kind of both very critical of Herodotus and a lot of praise for Herodotus in Croesus this week.
Okay, anyone else want to share?
Who else here? Sarah?
I think someone's already going behind me.
Okay, well,
It's
We-
not. Yes, no.
go to Culver Stockton, and if always can come back to you. All right, Culver Stockton, you are up.
Okay.
Check.
Hi there.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you for having me. My name is Leslie Wilson. I'm from Culver Stockton, and I am part of the Cambyses group. I'd like to touch on what one of the students from Belmont Abbey actually talked about, and what in the chat is going on about how women are portrayed in Herodotus. That was actually one of our prompts for our final paper that we did. It was my final prompt. I chose to focus on I don't know how to say this word, but on Sigmund Freud's The Madonna and the Whore complex, how women are portrayed as two extreme opposites of one another, with Madonna being weak and submissive, or the ideal woman, and the whore being not literally a whore, but the exact opposite, as more independent or less than ideal. And so I really found in Herodotus that not only were those two extremes present, but also there was just a third category that I could only describe as odd and what is going on here, such as the Greek myth of Heracles and the snake goddess in Scythia in book 4. I was like, where does that play in with the two extremes of there? But I also, there weren't, with women, as one of the people in Slack had commented, the concept of woman, he said, in Herodotus is portrayed as weak, but the women in Herodotus are often strong, as we saw with the two queens of Babylon. One was Nicotis. I'm sorry if I butcher these names. I don't speak Persian. And her engineering feats of the river, and then her revenge for her brother against the Egyptians by flooding the entire chamber with a river and then letting herself be swept away in order to escape revenge. But it was really interesting. I found more of the oddball and the horror references than more Madonna references than anything else, as you can see. I used my teacher's textbook of The Landmark, and you can see all those, and that's only a fraction of the book. And I really like how Herodotus does it, that he doesn't portray strong women as weak, but he still portrays women as a certain way. And I thought that was interesting that we still use that dichotomy in modern day literature and modern day culture as well sometimes. That's all I have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Leslie. Let's see. Let's see if we have anyone else from Culver Stockton joining us tonight. Maybe.
I guess that's it.
Okay, that's good. Thanks again to Leslie for joining us. Let's see. Anyone else want to jump in? Let's see. There's a comment in the chat room about Herodotus seeming to be bitter towards both women and the Ionians, including them in the histories because they're influential in some way, but he's not necessarily favorable to them. So there's some food for thought there. Let's see. Lots of big picture topics that you talked about tonight and in your teams through the weekend. And we can continue that discussion a little bit on Thursday as well. So there were several points made today about Herodotus's legacy, the ethnographical details, the historical contributions. So we can keep talking about that. Neutrality, whether Herodotus's bias should affect our evaluation of the historicity of his work. Can we evaluate that work, admitting some bias that we do see? We just had the chat room discussion mention Ionians and women as not getting necessarily a favorable place in his view. Even if it is biased, if we see that Herodotus isn't neutral, does that make it useless as history or devalue the history? I think that that's something we can continue to talk about. We also had some talk tonight about the intent and purpose of the histories. Why did Herodotus write that? Write the histories? What is he trying to do? And on a big picture question, I forgot which one of you answered this question. I think it was Aaron. He's writing to explore the causes of the Persian Wars, but we can also look smaller. Why does he include certain details? Why does he go so far back? Let's see, influence and legacy. This was something Eileen talked about last week in the common session too. What is the influence of Herodotus as a historian? And we can keep talking about those women and then small characters who seem to have small parts but a lasting influence. So I want to give you the opportunity to keep talking about some of these big picture themes. Several brought up tonight. But I'd also like to spend a few minutes on Thursday talking about the course, this particular component of your classroom courses. So tell us a little bit about what you thought was successful and useful in having this component as part of your course, and what are some things that we could do better or you could get more out of. And we're talking about Herodotus's intent. What do you think the intent or purpose of doing a course like this is? And do you think that it was successful in trying to make that intent and purpose come to fruition? So kind of a short session tonight. I know that a lot of people had a little bit of a break this week because of holiday and preparing to go into finals week, but I hope we can regroup and have some discussion on Thursday, a little more back and forth maybe. Yeah, please consider being on camera, especially if you haven't yet.
Gwen?
Yes, Patrick.
Mind if I pitch in with something, just since we are running we have a little bit of time. It's just really in response to kind of some of the discussion about the role of women and powerful women versus influential women, and it's just something that I think we might have mentioned in class here, but it kind of comes up again in Professor Sandridge's post here, and that there seems to be a difference between where men and women can influence events, right? For men, it's, with the obvious exception of Artemisia, but for men, it's public, right? It's in speeches, it's in front of other men, it's in front of audiences, it's in military campaigns. Whereas with the exception of Artemisia, the influential women, and whether you talk about it as powerful or however, but the influential women are people like Candaules' wife at the very beginning, right, who has a huge impact on Gyges and hence on Croesus. Gorgo later on, and Cleomenes' daughter. These women exert their influence in private, in a domestic setting, inside the home, inside a bedroom, inside a tent, which is really the opposite of where men are doing it. So I just think that's one way of thinking about the difference. It's both how they operate, but also where is the location, the locus of their power. That's all.
Good. Thank you very much, Professor Wadden, for bringing that up. Something always good to think about. And I think that, something else I just thought of another topic, as if we need more, but something else we could talk about on Thursday in sort of bringing things to a close is how thinking about some of these themes in Herodotus, how that affects how we see the world today. And do we think, like Professor Wadden just said, in the ancient world, we definitely see this locus of influence being different for men and women. That is different today, but how different is it? We see women in roles, powerful roles, that would have been traditionally occupied by men in the past. We definitely see that shift has happened in our society, but is there still, to some extent, that split? And so that's something to, another bit of food for thought about women, about how we view history. How does that affect how we assess our world today as we read? So lots of potentially great topics, I hope. No real assignment for Thursday in terms of writing, but I do hope some of you will come to our come to our hangout and share some of your thoughts on camera or in the chat room, and we can have a good discussion. All right. So with that said, start thinking about some good points to make for Thursday. All right. And thank you all for showing up today, and thank you to our volunteers, Aaron, Leslie, Casey, and Eric especially. All right. And I'll see you Thursday.
Thanks. Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Have a good night.